So, hello everybody, and welcome to the last of our organised sessions for Meeting of the Waters Locative Media Oceania. And this evening, I'm really excited to introduce to you the three founding members of an organisation called Intercreate. But before I give them a brief introduction, I would just like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the unceded lands of the Ngunnawal people, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I would also like to acknowledge all First Nation peoples in the audience and pay my respects to your country and to your families. So tonight we have Pasha Clothier, who you've already met with an earlier session. We also have Nina Czegledy, who is also she's the chair of Intercreate, and Pasha is the creative director of projects. And we have Trudy Lane, who's also a trustee with Intercreate, and her friend and collaborator with the shorebird community at Pukurukuru, Keith. Is that right?
Yeah.
Cool. So so welcome everybody. So it's a really relaxed session. I think everybody's going to take a turn in speaking. You'll probably all jump into each other's conversations, which is totally what we do. And and then at the end of the presentations, we'll open up to the floor for questions and more conversation. So I will now turn off my microphone and camera, and I'll hand over to you, Pasha.
Yes, okay. So, haere mai nau mai, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Watawai iole and konnichiwa. I'm going to now share my screen and to introduce really in the first instance Intercreate, and then this actually directly engages with the importance of water. So in the iconic flavour of black and white, let us begin. So why has been a really significant component, and for those of you who saw the presentation I gave the other evening, this was the very last slide, and it's a chart that's called Te Hihiri o Te Taio, which is chart of natural universal energies, put together by Dr. Tahurirangi Waikiripuru. And he always claimed that this was a piece of pre-colonial knowledge. And then, look, there are various and a range of kind of interpretations that are placed on this chart. If you look at the top section where it says Te Taio Māori, Taio is the word for universe. So Te Taio Māori is the Māori universe. If you look at what's there, you have Wā Atia Hihiri, so time, space, energy, Awheko, matter, takitahi, interaction. These are all extremely familiar to people with a Western science background as fundamental elements of how things are configured. And then right up along there, beside takitahi, the interaction is why, which is water, or as Hurirangi presented it, flow. So this flow was more an energistic conception. Flow, of course, does run through everything. You get it as we're observing in volcanoes. You get it in seas. You get it in geology, geography. You get a flow between species, which is one of the things that we are suffering with COVID. So but what is really remarkable about this in terms of engaging with tangata whenua, the indigenous people of Aotearoa New Zealand, is that this idea of wai or water is elevated to an element of the universe. So you could sort of contrast that. I sort of characterize the common Western approach to water as like thrash and trash. Which is more or less what happens to it. We just run taps and then we tip waste into water. Whereas for many Indigenous groups, water has this elevated status, and there are good reasons to be thinking about why it is that why or water or flow should have an elevated status in our understanding of things. I mean, you can base that really simply, like two of the three most abundant elements of the universe are hydrogen and oxygen. And those are the two elements that get to make water. So it's very interesting. A lot of the water in the universe from the scientific point of view is tied up in ice. It's frozen, but there's some rationale for holding this as an important element to your thinking, rather than thinking that this is just a kind of thing that you turn the tap on, you brush your teeth and you're sort of done kind of thing. So it's an interesting and different perspective. Now, some of these the projects that we've been doing under the banner of Intercreate. It all goes back to 2006, and then because we're artists, instead of having one theme, we had two. One of them was environmental response, because our awareness was at that time that the data was in on climate change. We actually knew what was going to be happening, and that's the scenario that we're living in now. And then the second thing was connection and disconnection. The other thing about the foundation of Intercreate is that we always thought that one of the solutions to resolving the environmental crisis was to simply engage with Indigenous groups. That was all. We were just talking about having a discussion. I mean, that's now broadened out, because certainly in places like the Australian outback, it's important for regional authorities to take leadership from Aboriginal groups around the management of land resources in regard to fires. So we began by saying we just need to get everybody around the same table, but it's now at the point where we need to take a little bit of leadership from Indigenous groups. And the disconnection was about this strange space that we all lived in, predominantly online, where we were connected, but at the same time we were disconnected because we're not in the same kind of space. So we just played wonderfully with that. And then I have here, this is the image of just after the porphyry. A porphyry is a formal welcoming into the place of this wharenui or meeting house. And then I don't know if you can see my mouse here, but right towards the back, over near the window, there's a gentleman with white hair, more or less. White is better than, clearly white rather than grey. That is Te Hurirangi Waikiri Blue. Nina Czegledy, you can hardly see her, but she's over on the left-hand side near that diagonal stripe of light. There's a flash of blue and just her hair appearing, and then the rest of people are all the artists who turned up. And then it was just felt at that time that we should be having our welcoming with tangata whenua, and it was actually Te Hurirangi who led the ceremony for welcoming us into the wharenui, but also into Taranaki itself. Quite phenomenal, a very special meeting house, that one at Orway. Then scans 2009, the words rāranga tangata is actually Charlie Tafaile's phrase for the internet, the weaving together of people. And this phrase was adopted by Sally Jane Norman, who was a keynote, as an umbrella for her like creative practice, if you like. But it's quite striking that amongst tangata whenua, or the indigenous people of New Zealand, there are these concepts that are sitting there. The weaving together of people is kind of perfect for the internet, if you know what I mean. And then importantly for us, for Intercreate, at the hui, which is held in the local gallery, Te Hurirangi stood up and he gave us a place to stand in Taranaki. And then essentially, in lots of ways, although we are dispersed, Nina is in Toronto, Trudy is in Pukorokoro, well north of here, Tracy is in Australia, the trustees are dispersed, we very much have been involved in a weaving together of people. Scans 2011 Eco Sapiens. Actually, Trudy was the main coordinator for that event, and she again located the hui out at Orway Marae, which was truly an art science hui, an investigation, all based around this idea of human development consisting of moving on from Homo sapiens to become Eco Sapiens as a kind of necessary step. And at that, at Eco Sapiens, actually, Te Hurirangi Waikiripuru was a keynote speaker. And as the keynote speaker, one of the things that he did stress was why all water. And then so at the time I was working on curating a project for Istanbul for ICEA 2011. And one of and this was aimed at what we called at the time cultural bridging. So I was trying to look at various themes in Western science that also were matched in the thinking of indigenous peoples. The notion that life emerges from water is one that's held by both sides. That's a convention of tangata whenua. It's related in multifaceted ways around the waters of birth, and it's expressed in a range of ways. And of course, in Western science, we have the conventional view of the whole thing of fish, amphibians, birds, etc. So that went in as one of the themes for Istanbul. One of the other major themes of interconnection is actually the notion that all is energy. So you've definitely, the tangata whenua view is that there is an energy to all things, and that's actually matched by quantum theory, as a matter of fact, well, quantum science. The basic quantum viewpoint in this sort of general overall sense is that we live in an energistic universe, and it analyzes interrelationships between particles and such like through their energy exchanges. For 2012 in Albuquerque, the whole thing was themed on why. And then this is quite typical in a sense of the way that Te Hurirangi would engender newness and provide a rich resource of projects. So we did want to have an exhibition themed on why, and that was articulated in many, many ways, from creative projects through to the Institute of Geological and Nuclear Sciences, a video that they'd produced, through to, like individual artworks and video-based pieces, all related around this key theme of why and flow, backgrounded against this awareness of the Anthropocene and what was going on with the environment. So terrifically important leadership provided by Hurirangi there. Scans 2013 is like, you know, a return back home. Third nature was like a hybrid of other natures. You know, we've all heard of second nature. Third nature was meant to be this hybrid space of knowledges joining together. And then really the whole exhibition was based on a spiral which curled out of the museum. It wrapped around the natural history sections of the museum, and then went out down the steps and then out into the town and into Pukekura Park. So it was about spreading outwards, I guess. Then we wanted to have a water-themed event in Aotearoa at a Scans. It was quite popularly thought of amongst artists. It followed from the Y. And then I was having a cup of coffee with Te Urutahi Waikiripuru, who's the daughter of Te Hurirangi, and we were discussing how could we make this Scans approachable to the community of Parihaka. And she said, well, how about water and peace? And as it turned out, the unification of these two themes, water and peace, sent a kind of beacon, a signal out to Indigenous groups worldwide, because Indigenous peoples have quite a strong focus on those two particular issues or concerns. And then as a result, we had expressions of interest from Inuit peoples, and 2 Nunavut people were funded to come out from Vanuatu as well. And that also did kick off our commencement of engagement via Tracy with Aboriginal peoples too. So it was quite a special event there. Following from that, we were wanting to hold events which brought all this together. So the idea of water, peace, power was that, you know, water and peace, sure, but the power was alternate energy sources. And so we began exploring, in particular, solar energy, battery powered resources that were charged up through solar panels, and that sort of thing. And then articulating the concepts of power through the lens of Indigenous groups, because of course, if you're Indigenous, the notion of power you have quite a different perspective on that, because you've generally been subjected to the power rather than a participant in it. So that was it was an extraordinary and wonderful event to kick off. We then held He Pūrawai Hauhorongo, which is one of the ways of expressing water, peace, power in Te Reo, and that was truly an extraordinary event. There were 4 keynotes. 2 were kuia, who are senior Maori women. One was Nina and another one was Roger Molina. So that gives you some idea of the kind of drawing together of presentations around that event. And then this was hosted entirely at Parihaka. And then that meant that part of it included the kaitiaki, the guardians of the waterways in the local region, giving us presentations by taking all of the symposium down to the water. It's like the opposite of what we can do now. We went and all stood as a group down by the waterways to hear them talking about their care and kaitiaki of the waterways in ways that, you know, we just can't do now. But very special events. And then I guess I'm now wanting to wrap up a little bit. So I'm hoping that's just given you some idea of these events that we've been organising through Intercreate. I think all of us have had a really quite strong conviction, and I'm very, happy. Nina was talking about the other days, we've been collaborating for 15 years and we're still friends. And there's a little bit to be said for that. It's been a lovely journey, but I began this presentation with the last slide of the previous one, and I wanted to return to Polynesian navigation, because there are a couple of things that that Polynesian navigators do in regard to birds. That's one of the key things that you would study when you're out on open sea is bird behavior, actually. And so there are two things. I was recently watching a video which was produced by an organisation in Kawhia here, which is called Te Waka Horua, which is the double-hulled canoe. But there was a woman there saying, who was leading a workshop, and she was saying, it's late in the evening, and then you're out on the water, the stars aren't out, there's not a lot of clouds around. If you suddenly see a bird, fly, thousands of meters straight up and then come back down again, you're going to follow that bird, because what it's done is it's flown high in order to get a visual fix on the landscape, right? Because you're at a disadvantage when you're low down to the water. I think you can see something like 9 miles. But she was saying you're then going to follow that bird, because that bird is headed for a landmark. And then one of the other things you'll also notice about, you will know the paths of migratory birds when they occur at certain times. So, there'll be certain times of year when migratory birds are flying north. If at that time of year you see a migratory bird flying south, you know that that's a warning sign that potentially that flock is turning around because there's a storm ahead. So these are the kind of things that Polynesian navigators do know when they're out sitting on the waters amongst a number of other kind of cues and building this kind of dynamic mind map of their journey, if you like. And then it sort of led to me thinking about, okay, surely in this day and age, we can create like a sort of autonomous drone. It's made of organic materials. It's guided by it navigates by the electromagnetic sphere, and also by stars. And it can fly 12,000 kilometers without stopping. I think we would all agree that that would be a fantastic piece of technology, but there's no need to implement that project because it's one of these. It's a kuaka or a godwit. That is precisely what it does. They have now been tracked to fly over 12,000 kilometers. And then this is really, and as you can see, it's all about why as well, but that's really a segue to introduce Trudy and Keith.
Kia ora. Thank you, Pasha. So, just to introduce myself, I'm Trudy Lane, and I'm here with Keith Woodley. And we both live in an area called Pukorokoro in Miranda, also Miranda. Pukorokoro being the original Māori name, and the mana whenua of this area is Ngāti Pawa, we just want to acknowledge them, as well as would love to talk to you a little bit about a big love that we have here, which is for our birds. We have The organic drone, as or Pasha has outlined it, comes to our area here, as well as many other spots around New Zealand, as well as in Australia, and all up and down. We're part of one of many global flyways, and we're part of what is called the East Australasian flyway. I say that right?
East Asian Australasian.
East Asian Australasian. Keith works at the Shorebird Centre that is here in Pukorokoro, and so is frequently out, and at the moment we're watching the birds return. And the centre, in collaboration with international organisations, has been for many years now doing different tracking programs of the birds so that we can learn more about their migrations and their needs, so that we can support their needs on their journey. So, and we can talk a little bit further about that and the international connections. I will just flip over to, would you like to introduce yourself any further, Keith?
Oh, not really. You've done a good job.
I've done a good job.
Yeah, okay.
All right. So yeah, I will just screen share just a few visuals I put together, just to give you an idea of the work. But yeah, when the idea or the topic of the course was floated and to us, and of Locative Media, I couldn't think of a better and more interesting example to talk about, which is these birds being tracked and their location and going around the oceans and this big trip that they do. So I will just go and share screen and try and find, actually I might tidy up my screen first. And go to, there we go. Sorry, where is the right screen? It's not giving me. Oh, that must be it. Okay. All right. So, and then do large present. Here we go. So just a few visuals to give you some idea. So this is Kwaka. This is the Pukorokoro Miranda Naturalist Trust, is the non-profit that is behind the Shorebird Centre that is here. I'm one of the council members there, and Keith is the manager. And there are many birds that come to our area, and they can be loosely grouped in national migrants and then international migrants that we're talking about now. A lot of them do this big Arctic trips. There's many birds that do those trips, and then ones that live here all year round. So this is an example of what you can see when you come here. There's thousands of birds flying around your head sometimes, at particular times of year in particular. This is a flock of godwits flying.
And some knots.
And some knots, which I'd have to pick out because knots and godwits look quite similar. Godwits are larger and red knots are smaller. This is just for grounding. This is a sort of what the experience of coming here can be. You look out across the mud flats where the birds feed, and you can use telescopes really help to see the birds close up. And so it's an experience that's open to very experienced people, birders that travel around the world trying to study the birds, through to kids, and yeah, so people who are just interested. And the Shorebird Centre is there to support that. And as a part of that work, there's also this international collaboration going on to track the birds on these big migrations and to understand more about what they do. So in this graphic, it shows the main thrust of their navigation. They go up and they feed in China, and the godwits do, and then they go up to Alaska to breed, and then they are famous for their non-stop flights home. And this was a rough theory.
Up to about 2006.
Up to about 2006. And then the first tracking device was implemented in
2007, where godwits had satellite transmitters implanted inside them surgically, and that was the brown arrows here give us the first confirmed track of a migration of bar-tailed godwits. So each of these flights is non-stop, and this was confirmed by a female called E7 in 2007, who had one of these transmitters.
And the technology to be able to do this tracking has been growing over time, and so one of the things that we currently are using, and that part of this international collaboration of researchers is using, is tracking of a set of godwits that were tagged in Miranda.
Yep, in November 2019. And the advance in this one, previously the original transmitters had a battery, so they only last for 6 months, 8 months maximum. Now there are little devices with solar power, and these devices are, well, ideally they will last for at least 3 years. So for now we can get tracks of individual birds in 3 consecutive years, which is of incredible value.
So they're starting to see some patterns emerging, repeating similar dates and things like that. Yeah. And of course, we've got the the disruption where E7 was the original longest flight in the world, non-stop flight.
Yes. In 2007, E7 flew from the southwest coast of Alaska to New Zealand to Pukurukuru, 11,680 kilometres in 8 days and 4 hours. And then last year, a male bird arrived in New Zealand having flown 12,000 kilometres in just over 9 days. And last Sunday, a female bird arrived at Pukurukuru having done 12,200 kilometres. She was the new champion, but she was only the new champion for a few minutes because a bird that landed in Australia had flown 13,000 kilometres without stopping. So these birds just keep surprising us in what they can do. We keep thinking, well, we understand now what the limits of these birds are, and the birds will say, actually, no, we can do this as well.
Yes, they're amazing. And one of the amazing things, there's many, but the things that they do to be able to do these journeys, like shrink their organs, and they, as we'll show you a little later, they put on huge amounts of weight. But also that when they go up and they breed and they hatch young chicks, and 13 weeks later, those chicks are flying back here by themselves, finding their way to New Zealand and Pukurukuru. So lots of amazing things about these organic drones. But one of the things that we started to talk about was the further understanding that the tracking can give us just by following the stories of these individual birds. And in the case of this one, the beautifully named 4BWRB.
Blue, white, red, blue.
That's the leg colours, the tags on the leg. I'm putting in a pitch for some other names, but that we could see that this tag bird flew down on its journey, and I think it left on the same date that it left last year.
It did.
And then it started to turn around. And when Adrian Regan, who's been following, and he's part of the Global Flyway Network, as a lot of these researchers are, but he analysed the wind at the same time, and you could see the correlation that it definitely hit a storm and had headed back, just as Pasha was talking about. And the other thing that we were thinking about was that we're tagging one bird here, whereas the bird is likely to be flying in a flock of somewhere between
10, 20 to 100 plus, even a couple of hundred. It does vary.
So it's likely to be able to assume that that decision was made collectively in flight, amid very high winds, that their ability to kind of understand from what the group is doing, the decision was made, big decision to turn around. And as David Lowry mentioned, like a kind of a rational decision making.
Yeah, these birds clearly can make decisions based on the elements. They've got a plan B if they're faced with conditions that are not to their liking. The tracking has also showed us that these birds, a bird crossing the Pacific, it can be thousands of kilometres from the nearest point of land, and if it's drifted off track by winds, the tracking shows us the bird can actually make corrections. It can get to a stage where, when the conditions come right again, it can make a correction in its course and then turn and head directly to where it was originally going. So their navigation systems are quite superb.
Oh yeah, and Nina will talk about it a little further later, but just briefly to touch on that, they use these different studies have shown these different layers of techniques that they use to navigate, one being able to orient to a North Star, being able to understand which is the central star in the sky, polarized light to be able to understand where they are globally, and the magnetic fields,
the angle of the sun.
Yeah.
The birds also they've got some sort of sense of barometric pressure, so they can detect weather patterns either ahead of their track or at different altitudes. So almost certainly they're adjusting their altitudes on the flight to try and get the best conditions possible. So everywhere you look at them, the brain of this bird has got a pretty efficient system operating it.
And so extremely complicated piece of hardware. And going to Pasha's interest too, we were talking earlier about a book that you've been reading recently, Keith, about the quantum kind of.
There's a book called Living on World on the Wing by Scott Wedensaw, an American writer who's a really good narrator of these sort of things. And quantum physics enters the picture. It's been thought that birds have some form of, whether they can actually visualize, they've got some sort of visual connection with magnetic fields. And I never quite understood how that works, and I still don't. But there was a recent research suggests that there's quantum physics comes to play in the case of two random molecules, that the position of these molecules in relation to the magnetic fields can give the bird a cue as to where it is or what it should be doing. Now, I don't pretend to understand this, but I kind of can understand how this might be the case, that it would help explain why these birds with quite small brains can do these amazing things.
So this slide is talking about the bird that snuck off and did 13,000 kilometers just to usurp the other one.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Just one-upmanship. It's just
intolerable.
But this is a red knot, so it's not a godwit. And Keith has since told me that there is a good image of the same thing, but this is an example. In about April, March, when you're out on the mudflats and you see the birds, it gets really hilarious because they're so big.
So these knots breed in Chukotka in far eastern Russia. So they're the second most numerous of the Arctic migrants we get in New Zealand.
Mm. So they're building up their fat supplies so that they can do these big journeys. They're gathering the fuel on those mudflats. And so this is what they'll tend to look like before they go, like trying to lift themselves out of the mud. And it's hard to imagine how they fly when they're that heavy. But this is an example of what they can look like when they make it back. So this is again a red knot, recently returned and emaciated after all of that fuel being burned up from that 8 to 10 day sort of journey. So yeah, so that is speaks clearly to why the stopping points, like the Godwit does the non-stop flight, but on the way up there's the stopping points, and they need that food as they go up. And again, this locative media is helping us understand where they go and the patterns that they're doing, and what are the behavioral kind of decisions that they're making. And it's also leading to collaboration across the globe about preserving the sites where they feed. This is one of the ones for our particular flyway as in New Zealand. So as mentioned, there's many flyways, global flyways, and this is the one that we're within.
And this East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership is a collection of governments. There's 20 governments in the partnership, along with some NGOs such as Pukurukuru Miranda Naturalist Trust and some others. And it's just a collaborative forum, if you like, recognising that if these birds are doing these huge migrations, they're linking habitats in far-flung places. And these birds do not recognise the political constructs, the geopolitical constructs that we call nation states and borders. They don't recognise those. And so this partnership is kind of recognising that as well, that any sort of moves to try and conserve the habitats for these birds is got to be international.
Which, that's just some technical stuff, but this leads into a documentary that I would really recommend, and that sort of talks about the work that the Shorebird Centre has been doing with China, but then also this documentary is about the work with North Korea, trips to North Korea, about 6 trips now?
Yeah, 5 times for me, and 7 total, yeah.
7 total, yeah. So yeah, it does a little summary of the last trip over, and going over to North Korea, building relationships, and then that last trip finding a new site, because in China so much of the mudflats has been developed and built on that their reserve is actually big farmed. What is the food that they're growing there?
Agriculture, yeah.
Agriculture, yeah. So their reserves are actually farmed areas, and the birds are kind of getting what they can amongst that, but they're competing with people.
So basically the main thrust is that over the last 30, 40 years, nearly a half of the mudflats of the Chinese coast have been lost to development. And those mudflats, of course, are the habitat for the birds. That's the gas stations for these guys. And so that's been driving a decline. All the populations of shorebirds in our flyway have been declining quite dramatically in the last few years, and loss of habitat in East Asia is the primary driver, which has led to our involvement into this.
Which is why when they were in China and they would look over and we're wondering about the other coast further south, the North Korean coast, and wondering what might be there in terms of habitat for the birds. And so this documentary goes through that exploration to see what they can find, and I've just got a few images. So I'm kind of giving away the funny end, though, aren't I?
That's all right. No, carry on.
But that North Korea has effectively become like, because of geopolitical situation, a reserve for the birds. The habitat is intact, and there's, you know, how many kilometres of...
Yeah, they are developing some of their mudflats and they are losing it. But we found that there was mudflats and bird populations that weren't occurring across the border in China anymore. So we kind of started to see this place as a bit of a safety valve. And this is an example. The birds you can see heading towards the coast are almost all bar-tailed godwits, along with some eastern curlew, both endangered species. But it gives you a feel for the scale and the numbers involved.
Yeah, because they're all in their migration up, so they've all been grouping.
This is all in April as the birds are moving through.
So yeah, I think it's an interesting, for me, and on a creative sort of level, it's such a connector of not only places but people. You know, these birds. I mean, and this is just one flyway, and it's across all these different geopolitical boundaries and interests, and so yeah, there's lots of potential exploration there.
But one point to make about these birds, the godwits and the knots and all the other shorebirds, and coming back to the theme of water, is that these are tidal creatures. Their lives, for much of their annual cycle, their lives are governed by the tides. They're not water birds. They can't sit on the water. They feed when the tide uncovers the mudflats. When the tide covers the mudflats, they're forced to roost on the shoreline. And so water plays a significant part in the movement of water. The tidal movement of water plays an incredible part in the lives of these birds. And then they do these migrations across vast areas of open ocean.
Yeah, being a shorebird guide down at the waterfront down here, your timetable is the tidal timetable, so that you can guide people when the birds come close, because the water is pushing them close, so they're feeding on the mud close to you. So yeah, your life becomes tidal, and yeah, Keith's life is somewhat tidal because of...
Yes, I'm in tune with the lunar cycle like all the birds.
Yeah. So just as a way to kind of segue also into Nina, was just this shot here, which talks also and again about that collective understanding, or the ability that they have to kind of navigate and read each other very, very, very quickly, and that how that has enabled the amazing migrations, and yeah, how they feed and avoid predators and all those things. So yeah, so that's our little hello. So I'll stop sharing, and were we going to have you follow on immediately, Nina? Might as well, shall we? Or do we? Yeah.
I think so, because otherwise we run out of time.
Oh, right.
Hello, should I start, Tracy? She's not here.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Nina Czegledy, and I come from Toronto in the English language. It's actually from a Mohawk word called Takronto, which is meaning a place in the water where the trees are standing. So I would like to now share my screen, if I can. Come on. No. Okay, here I am. Is it okay, Tracy?
It's beautiful. Thank you, Nina.
Okay, thank you very much. So to follow Pasha's words about scans and through this beautiful presentation, thank you also to our guest, Kevin. I would like to follow and continue by talking about the collective motion of migratory species that frequently operate by celestial cues and use magnetic orientation. What I'm talking about is really more a summary of scientific confirmations instead of a more compelling narrative. Thank you for your patience. And also, I am not a spontaneous speaker, so I apologize, but I will read a lot of what I say because it's full of different references and I can't keep them in my mouth. So my involvement in Intercreate is the cause of this very presentation. And I would like to say just a few words about my involvement and organizational participation in Intercreate since the very beginning. And it was embracing a whole week span of international festivals, conferences, exhibitions, and artist residencies. And I also would like to pay tribute to the Hurangi, who came to our very first event in 2006, and who I remember he talked to each of us in the workshops, and it was really an amazing event, but was really, really impressive for me when later on, when we were in Istanbul at ICEA, he came and in a public space greeted the sunrise in the ceremonial robes and ceremonial words. And that was really something I will actually never forget. So for me, all my experience at scans was an ongoing learning experience, and I will forever treasure it. But cutting back to migratory birds and other migratory species. So the range of biological systems exhibiting group motion is wide. And as Andres Deutsch noted it includes bacterial colonies, migrating birds and locusts, schools of fish, groups of mammals, including people. For the longest time, there was very little scientific confirmation about the migration strategies of various species. However, the famous physicist Albert Einstein showed prophetic perception by suggesting there could be a link between the migration of birds and unknown physical processes. Vichko and his collaborators observed two distinct phases in the migration of birds. The first phase was during the pre-migratory period, and it involves the conversion of genetically coded information into an actual compass course. During migration, celestial rotation combined with the geomagnetic fields serve as external references. Celestial rotation alone mediated by stars at night or by the changing pattern of polarized light during the day, provides a reference direction corresponding to the geographic south or the geographic north, whichever the birds are flying. However, it can also serve direction when celestial cues are not available. A wealth of currently published literature exists on a wide variety of species following the stars for orientation. The impact of climate change on migrating birds includes earlier breeding, changes in timing of migration, changes in population sizes, and so forth. However, it is very important to note that many changes are not yet fully documented. Currently, several plant and animal species are moving north to higher elevations, confirming that migratory species are exceptionally vulnerable to detrimental impacts of climate change. The Climate Change Post of Finland reports that the climate zone suitable for boreal vegetation is expected to move 150 to 550 kilometers further north during this century. However, boreal vegetation cannot migrate at such a rapid pace, at least not naturally, because the adaptive capacity of animals and plants have clear genetic limits. If a change takes place too fast, not all species will be able to adapt themselves. Collective motion, as observed by Thomas Richter and collaborators, is one of the most common and spectacular manifestations of coordinated behavior. Contemporary understanding of collective behavior in nature is based largely on models such as migratory birds that assume that identical agents obey the same interaction rules. But in reality, interactions may be influenced by social relationships among group members. Vicek and Zaferis report observations of systems, including elements of macromolecules to robots, to groups of animals and people, which are reputed to be the most cited scientist in the specific field of collective behavior. Currently, he is researching the effects of hierarchy in a spectrum of systems, including flocks of drones and self-organizing network systems, and elements from macromolecules to robots, to groups of animals and people. According to Vicek, collective behavior refers to the phenomenon that individual units' actions is dominated by the influence of the others, of its neighbors, such as systems show interesting ordering phenomena as the units simultaneously change their behavior to a common pattern. Recent research and technology developments restructured collective motion research using software borrowed from the field of statistical mechanics, updated video and GPS tracking technologies, as well as high-precision data sets on moving animal groups from bacteria to human pedestrians, all help to discover the way to a fine-scale analysis of individual migrating behavior. Hang Yelen and his team, using 3D optical tracking, found that flocks of birds contain internal substructures with discrete pairs of individuals tied together by spring-like effective forces. Their results divulge a critical tension between individual and group-like level benefits during collective behavior in species with differentiated social relationships and have major evolutionary and cognitive implications. Using a computational model, Gutai and Guzin studied leadership issues in collective motion and the evolution of migratory strategies in migratory populations. They found that only a small proportion of the population gathered directional information, while the majority employs social cues alone. For example, microorganisms and cells typically use chemical or thermal cues, whereas many migratory birds use magnetic, visual, and olfactory information. In addition to responding to environmental cues, migratory organisms may interact socially with one another. Strikingly, the proportion of leaders in migratory groups reduces with the group size. Migratory strategies, social interactions. The history of Intercreate presents us with an excellent example of migration as a collective motion in people from the far north of Lapland to the far south to Taranaki. It is, or it was, a reverse migration compared to the climate-stricken birds moving from the polar circuit residences in Lapland at the end of the 90s to flocking to solar circuit in Tasmania and onto the solar circuit Atoria, New Zealand in 2006. Flocking is mostly observed in animals. However, some studies suggest that collective motion in human crowds detected a group sense inherent in human nature that lines us up favorably with birds and bees and ants and fish and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. And thank you, Pasha and Trudy and Keith. What a beautiful flow around talking about the history of Intercreate, to segue into the past of migratory birds, and then to flow into the more than human collective consciousness, and then back into the human collective consciousness of Intercreate. Thank you so much, everyone. I've just been looking, there's a couple of questions in the chat, so I might just speak to those before I hand over to everyone to ask their own questions. There was one question from Richard saying, any thoughts on why these creatures evolved to travel such distances? Have key locations moved in geological time, or is it about speculative flying journeys to find good place to habitat?
That's a very big question. The basic answer would be that the birds, we're talking about migratory birds, they track resources. So essentially, birds like godwits that breed in the Arctic, they're evolved in the tundra regions. They evolved up there. They would stay up there 12 months of the year if they could. But of course, the winter means that they can't do that. And so they've had to find resources outside of that area to support them. And over the millennia, they've found the mudflats of Australia and New Zealand. But it's one thing to find those areas, but those areas need to be able to support them. They need to be able to make a living while they're there. But those areas also must provide them with resources to allow them to get back into condition, to put on weight, to do all the things they need to do to get back to the breeding grounds when the time comes. So as to how these migration routes appeared, there's a lot of speculation, a lot of work going on over that. I guess one point to make was a lot of these birds have gone through genetic bottlenecks with ice ages over the last few thousand years, and so my suggestion would be the migration patterns of godwits that we know today, as far as New Zealand is concerned, is probably only 7,000 years old, because that's when the mudflats appeared. But the birds were around long before that, and so clearly they've been fairly adaptable in finding the places they need. Just how they find those places and just how it first came about, those are big questions, and I won't venture an answer on those. Thank
you, Keith. So the next question I've got is from Geeta. What is the effect of electromagnetic radiation, EMR, from cell towers and our excessive use of cell phones have on animal navigation abilities and their general health and well-being?
Well, I'm not aware of any impacts on the birds that we're familiar with. I don't think I'd be surprised if there are impacts. These birds are probably operating under different systems, would be my guess, but that's only my guess.
I don't know of any impact, but of course, if one digs deep enough in the literature, one might find one.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There's a comment here from Simone. I just saw on Instagram posts about how city buildings where I am need to turn off lights over a few days in order not to confuse some birds' flight path. Definitely love learning about the more than human world. I need to get binoculars. That's really nice. Look, everybody, I'd like you to venture your own questions to the group. I did have a question about health impact. I was wondering about the batteries. You know, the first bird that went over, you mentioned that the battery life only lasted 6 months or something. Was it then removed, or how was it? Did it dissolve, or, you know, that was a question in my mind, was the actual implant of the technology into the animal.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And at the time of the operation in 2007, when E7, for instance, got her transmitter implanted, I asked the vet who was performing the operation, I said, well, look, once the battery goes and if we ever catch this bird again, would we take out the transmitter? But he said, no, you wouldn't, because within a month of the operation, it's hermetically sealed by scar tissue. So it's inside the bird, and it would be more dangerous for the bird to try and remove it. And this was a 26-gram transmitter put into a bird which departure weight would be 600 grams. So it was really quite a solid object. So you would think, gosh, that's quite a big deal for this bird. So subsequently, E7 with that transmitter, she gave us a full migration track for 2007. The battery then failed. To the battery wasn't, you know, the transmitter wasn't putting any signals, but she clearly migrated in 2008. She left here and arrived back. But then for other reasons, she ended up losing a leg over a couple of years, and she became a one-legged godwit. She changed sites. She went to another site about 200 kilometres from here, where she effectively retired. She wasn't migrating anymore because she couldn't get into condition. But the last record of her was in early 2014. And so the point is, with that transmitter inside her, from 2007 to 2014, she still managed to survive and make a living, even with one leg. Wow. So that was very heartening. And the other quick point I'd make is the sample size of birds that received these transmitters was tiny. There was 8 birds from Pukurukura in 2007, and about a further 10 birds in 2008. So the sample size was very small, but from that, we got a huge amount of information, and we wouldn't need to do that again with those particular transmitters. And of course, since then, technology's got smaller and far more effective.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just love the concept of an organic drone.
Brilliant. Yeah, brilliant.
Some of the emails that were flying around, because I thought, no, I don't want to spoil this for myself. So it was wonderful to see it unfold in the presentations. Do we have some comments or questions from the audience? Please feel free to turn on your camera and mic and join us. I reckon our speakers would love to see your beautiful faces. They might be a bit shy. It's Friday night. Everyone's drinking wine. Well, Trudy is.
Well, cheers.
Cheers. We've had an extra hour to drink wine.
So we've got Fiona's turned a camera on. Hello.
Kia ora, Kate.
She might be just listening because she's trying to do her PhD.
Right.
The never-ending PhD.
Kia ora.
Sorry, I just dubbed you
It
in.
is. But yes, that is how it is. I was just wondering what plans are fit for January.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm really sorry to have to say, but it hasn't been distributed widely, but we have to forego January because the potential for inviting hundreds of people to Pariakapa has it's not possible under COVID conditions. And then the idea of asking people from Auckland to contribute as artists or speakers is not actually possible. And then so one of the side issues that that myself and Tracy and Marta are talking about is that how we can manifest an art project under these conditions, because it's really, they're really quite stringent. I mean, yeah, it's actually not possible to do the things that we thought we were going to do in January 2022. Sadly.
We've been talking about digital weaving something digitally.
Yeah, I mean, you see, and then it's a weird thing about digital is on the one hand, it contains the energy of the, I should possibly, look on my video. On the one hand, it contains the energy of the indigenous to talk about energies, but on the other hand, it's very problematic to engage with indigenous at times of, what would you call it? At times of bacterial emergency or something, if you know what I mean. Like, for example, generally the people who have been most impacted by diseases have been tangata whenua. So it's like, how do we engage with tangata whenua over this space of not being able to physically engage, which is the preferred space of tangata whenua? How do we engage with that? Yeah, and while creating works. I mean, it would be lovely, if Trudy and Keith could kind of figure out some way to interact that we could all share around a creative project that would, bring forth some of these ideas and conceptions that we were talking about. But it's hard at the moment to conceive how that could come about, but maybe this is a thing we all need to work on. I mean, maybe it's a valuable idea to consider, to bring these knowledges together and the creative thing to create a project, and then that probably, I mean, like we can't interact with Godwits like collaborators, right? We only have their data in a sense, if you know what I mean. But maybe there's a way we can find to talk about these things and to articulate them, that we can generate creative projects that bring that all together. But that's a question. It's not nobody knows the answer at this moment.
Just an aside, just to point out that 2 days ago we received a report of 2 Godwits on Motu Beach in New Plymouth. So the Godwits may be trying to help you with this.
That's right.
Yeah.
They might actually be trying to send me a sign. Yeah, totally.
There is the layer that we didn't really talk about, which is the decades and decades of humans doing the locating of the birds using binoculars, and particularly when the sort of bird tagging sort of program started with the banding of the bird's leg. And so then it's amazing now, like, so the bird that just flew to Australia for 13,000 kilometers, and he last time he ended up at that bay, but then he almost went there, but he went south.
Oh, the New Caledonia. That was Coupe, the bird that turned around. So the bird that turned around 2,000 kilometers into its southward flight and went back to the starting point, and then 11 days later stayed out again. Just like last year, has ended up in New Caledonia. So whether that bird always does that or not, we don't know.
But I was just meaning that we got a photograph. One of the guys locally got a photograph of, because there's a big network of humans. Before we had the locative media, there's a big network of birders who will go out to that beach and try and spot those birds, and that's the collective intelligence that's been developing around that.
And over the last few days, I've been out on the shoreline here collecting. We've got a number of Godwits with leg flags that have got 3-letter codes on them, and so reading those codes, like, we know those individual birds. And some of the birds I've seen, they've been seen multiple times in the last few years. And to give you 2 examples, one bird that was here 2 days ago, we know that bird to be at least 20 years old now. So it was banded as an adult at 3+, and so it's at least 20 years old. Could be older.
Yeah.
And another bird I saw a week ago, I'd last seen it in a site in North Korea. So as Trudy says, the personal thing, the human interaction of getting out there and looking at birds and connecting with individual birds is really quite special. Not only is it neat science and getting a lot of information, but it's a fantastic interaction of you with this amazing creature.
Yeah, and it's not that hard. Like there's there's a shorebird guide down at the shorefront. Like we have little forms, and you can read up how to read the tags. Use your binoculars. See if you can see a tagged bird. Get its code, write it down, send it to us. And when I was doing the shorebird guide role, then we'd send that to Adrian, and he'd get back to us, get back to that person with the history of that bird, like when it was tagged, where it's been spotted over the years, so roughly how old we think it is at least, because we might not know how many years it was when we tagged it. But so there's a lot of fun potential.
I have a question about the bird that landed in Australia. Where did it land?
It's Tweed Heads.
Oh, almost in my home territory.
Yeah. Just one further point about the idea of banding and marking birds with bands and flags. So 30 years ago, when we first started putting flags on godwits here, sometimes it took a long time to get the details back of a particular bird. There was one godwit was shot in eastern Russia, and it took 2 years for the band details to get back to New Zealand. It took 2 years for that to happen. Such was the nature of the times and communication and so forth. Spin the clock forward 20 years, and the person who received that report in Moscow and sent it off to us eventually was working in a remote part of Chukotka in eastern Russia, and recorded a abandoned bird and emailed the information to us, and within 6 hours, he was still in the field in a remote part of eastern Siberia. He received full details about that bird.
Wow.
So there's been quite an advance in communication, shall we say.
Yeah. One of the things I do want to say is about this new generation of scientific research that does involve collaborations with people who are off radar, basically. I mean, in the contemporary Western Hemisphere, the political Western Hemisphere, North Korea and China are just off radar. But what I do love about what you're doing with Pukorokoro is that you're engaging with people from North Korea and people in China, like actively, and then that's a beautiful thing. So can you just fill us out with a little bit of detail about how that all turns out?
Yes, it's really it is an extraordinary experience to be up there. But you find that this is a universal about us as people. Once you get down below the geopolitical layer, and you're dealing one-to-one with people, individual people on a whatever your areas of interest, there's warm engagement, and so the people we've been working with in North Korea, they're interested, they're enthusiastic about these. They want to know more about these birds. They want to know what they can do to help these birds, and so that's been really a heartening thing to see. And so yes, and with China, we've been involved. We had a partnership with the reserve at Yalujiang, which is where most of our godwits stop. That's on the border with North Korea, and we've been going up there for many years, counting birds and so forth. And each year you'd go up there, and there was more habitat loss than there was last year. Huge amounts of mudflats that were there last year are busy being obliterated the following year. And this went on year after year. So you just come back feeling totally depressed, totally sort of, what can we do about this? I mean, this is just overwhelming. But really, through our work, we wouldn't claim a lot of this, but we have contributed to a process in our flyway, which has led to the situation where now the Chinese government is serious about trying to protect some of the remaining Yellow Sea wetlands. And there are indications they are serious about that. And the biggest indication is that they've gone down the path of seeking World Heritage listing under UNESCO for some of their Yellow Sea sites. Now, for a country like China, where face is a big thing, for them to be going on the international stage and doing this, they wouldn't do that if they weren't serious about it. And so over the last 2 or 3 years, we've started to allow ourselves a degree of cautious optimism that things may be changing. And we want to hold on to that.
That's really fascinating. I thought while I was listening to Nina speak too about the whole idea of collective motion, and we're talking about COVID and species migration, and here we all are as our species, and we can't collectively physically move in the way that our more than human friends can. Because I was looking at the herds of this and that and thinking, wow, you know, they can all get out there and do stuff together, and here we are sort of looking through the screen. But it was just a random thought that I had. And even the fact that, you know, the scans that we've been talking about having in January, it's that sort of, you know, that disease as opposed to disease that's keeping us separated physically.
We'll try and practice working in unison, moving in unison.
All right, everybody together.
Yeah, we want to move in unison.
We'll do flocking.
I just had a comment really on that idea of collective motion. I'm sort of in a collective of different artists and historians, and one of them is a group. They're called Somebody's Art, a dance group, and they do look at this, at flocking. They move in these cyclic kind of ways, and that's a lot of their choreography is drawn from that. So I think that's really interesting. I don't know, Nina, if you've got any you know, references to more info on that.
I don't have specific information, but I do know I belong to a group here in Toronto at the university, which is belongs to the drama department, and we have a digital drama department section as well. And it is very interesting how we have some very international events which spring from Singapore to I don't know, Kamchatka, and it is very interesting how, especially now in the pandemic, this motion, which is not necessarily physical, it's in terms of physical, it is online, has really grown much bigger. And you organize not just this conference, which is so eminent, but other smaller conferences and smaller events. You know, just tomorrow, we are going to have a dinner party. And the dinner party, and this is partly with Dramala, is consisting of the people who cook in Norway, and in Vietnam, and in Taiwan, and in the Netherlands, and in Toronto. So it's not a direct, but it's an indirect collective movement.
It reminds me of, we had a morning tea a few weeks ago where everybody put up as their background their favourite morning tea food. You know, so there was scones and cakes and Tim Tams, and, you know, so it was a way of sharing that idea of, you know, getting together and having a cup of tea and a snack, but doing it virtually. You know, it was good for a laugh in lockdown.
And this is an environmental group, so it's not just people getting together.
Well, I really feel like, I was going to say that I feel Meeting Oceania is doing so much of, you know, what virtual connection can do. And I've often watched the talks the morning after they've been given, but I've traveled through these weeks with this immense sense of connection with creatives from all sorts of places, unified in struggle and deep thinking and deep concern and growing courage together and ideas. And it's so valuable. I just really, really am grateful to have been involved. And I feel like it comes directly through the Intercreate spirit that I encountered in 2013. And really, I mean, it's great to hear you tonight speak. I just want to testify how much it changed how I interacted with life, what kind of work I made, in fact, the whole direction of my life and where I now live and who I love, which is pretty extraordinary. You know, that's a deep effect. So that the aim of shifting culture and connecting art and science and indigenous thinking, and it really is something that has roots and that has integrity and that has been going for now a very long time and is having these effects.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. I mean, definitely, you know, for me, this event very much grew out of what I was also transformed by through Intercreate and scans and Parihaka, and the weaving that we've been making over so many years now of friendship, creativity, knowledge. Yeah, so even for you to even try and compare this to I guess the experience that I had is, you know, it's a real thank you very much, because you know, like you, that first experience with scans was transforming for me. And it was through those, you know, it was not just the formal conversations, it was through the little doorway conversations, people coming in to do a karakia after eating lunch. You know, it was all those things that really so integrated, that really made me realise that, you know, that there is so much more than the Western frame that I'd been trained to think in, you know, where I was like, this is work and this is art and this is my spirit, and, you know, and it started to totally dissolve all of that. So that's why it was really important for me to bring the three sort of the original intercreators together, and for them to explore this space. And I love that it's evolving too, and the fact that we brought the shorebirds into the conversation just makes it even more beautiful, because it resonates with everything that I think is what we're trying to touch on here. Sorry, I talk a lot, don't I?
No, I just want to say thank you. So nice to hear those thoughts, and also to thank you, Tracy and the organisers, for getting us three to riff for a week or more.
Very much, goodness, very much.
And we were chatting and riffing and talking about things while Adrian Regan was sending the birds' progress. So as our talks were progressing, the birds were progressing. And then we arrived here tonight. Yeah.
Yeah, no, so I do just want to say, you know, it's lovely to have Adrian's presence, Keith's presence, sorry.
We're often confused. It's all right.
Yeah, that's right. Keith's presence. Because it's really good to get a little bit of detail about this stuff. I mean, we often do at Intercreate think about the high level of things, and then it's really wonderful to have this expressed, as both you and Trudy Dudo, down to the everyday details of it, and the sort of a little bit of the messiness of it. I mean, yeah, no, so that actually has been really, really great to interact with. You know, you can do it via the, you know, Pukoro website page and all that sort of stuff, but to hear it live from you, it must have been fantastic. And then also to Nina, you know, just that's, you know, in terms of the flocking mechanisms and everything, it's just great. And then, yeah, we have flocked. I mean, we humans have flocked. And then, you know, that is the thing that we'll probably take out of this event. And then I hope that all of the participants have enjoyed it as much as possibly we have. Okay.
Thank you, Pasha. Now, everyone's being a bit quiet, so I'm going to issue another little request. If anyone's got a question, please ask now, otherwise we'll close the meeting very soon.
I was just interested to know how they're finding out how the birds are navigating. I'm not sure if you've already answered that, but it obviously was very complex. And I thought, how are they working that out?
Lots of different.
There's been a lot of studies over many years about how birds navigate. There was a classic study in Europe back in the, I think it was the 60s, where starlings that migrate from northwest Europe down to southwest Europe through the Netherlands and Belgium, and some adults and juvenile birds were captured in Belgium and moved to Switzerland, and they were released. And the adult birds released in Switzerland made an immediate correction and ended up where they were going to be, whereas the juvenile birds ended up flying in a certain direction, which ended up, astray the distance between, Belgium and Switzerland. That was an early start. Birds in enclosures with exposures to the night sky, with blotting paper and ink, and their migratory restlessness at the time of migration. The marks in the enclosure would show which direction were they trying to escape during this migration period, based on the night sky or based on magnetic cues or whatever it was. So there's been a lot of work over the years, but more recently this tracking, it's not so much answering how they do it, but it's certainly answering that they are actually doing it. As I mentioned earlier, they're making these corrections to their course. So I suspect it's a combination of the star map, the sun, magnetic fields, probably maybe factors we don't fully understand yet. But there are certainly a lot. There's a lot of things in their toolkit that they're using.
Yeah, fascinating.
This is Christine here. I'm in the dark, so that's why I'm not showing my face. It's in the middle of the night. But I did want to build on that question or ask a little bit more about that. When you're talking about the celestial rotation and electromagnetic fields, I'm curious about the physiology of the birds. Do they like look at the stars, or do they have some kind of a internal organ that's metallic, I don't know, that responds to electromagnetic? I'm just curious, like, what is it in the bird?
Something that touches on that is a question I often get asked is these birds that are flying for 8, 9, 10 days non-stop, do they sleep while they're flying? And there's a lot of research suggesting that some birds can shut down half a hemisphere of their brain as a way of saving energy and keeping, so they don't sleep as we know it, but there is some sort of thought where they can close down some of their systems. But I can't help thinking that these birds probably need some sort of visual capacity for the stars or the sun or whatever it is, or even magnetic fields. And so they're, my hunch is that there's a strong visual connection that these birds do need, that they are using sight, and perhaps not in ways that we have sight, but they're using sight as way of forming cues of navigating.
This was that blotting paper. I mean, isn't it? They gave them the maps that had the stars in the wrong position.
Yes.
And then others were exposed to the normal position, and the ones that were given the map with the wrong position navigated wrong.
Yes, that's right. So those sort of experiments, and then there's also a suggestion of olfactory cues, whereas some birds use a sense of smell to navigate. And there was an experiment where pigeons had their olfactory nerves cut, and it modified their behaviour. Other birds, it didn't. They were going on magnetic cues. So there's still a lot of work going on.
A lot of these studies you wouldn't be able to get like permission for now, right?
Oh, that's right, for sure.
So a lot of these are older studies, these ones that are, that we're talking about.
But the book we mentioned earlier, Scott Wiedensel's book, World on the Wing, it's just been published in the States. We're selling it through the Shorebird Centre, but it should be available now. And that was published this year, and it's an overview of bird migration and it's got a lot of stuff. It will give you a lot of leads. This book will give you a lot of leads for further investigation if you want to go down that path. So I'd highly recommend that.
Okay, thank you. And just as an aside, some of the time I live on the California coast, and we have godwits there. And so I loved hearing about the godwits from other places, and I just am learning a little bit about birds. So we have godwits, whimbrels, and willets, and of course they all looked totally alike to me when I was first starting. But now I use their beak shapes too as mnemonic devices to remember what's a godwit, a willet, and a whimbrel.
I have to say that your godwits are marbled godwits on the California
Yeah,
coast.
that's right. They're marble godwits.
And they're stay-at-homes compared with our guys. I mean, they don't go further south than Mexico, whereas our guys leave Alaska and come down to us.
Yeah, no, ours stick around.
Yeah, they do.
Thank you.
They're
very
very,
much.
very handsome bird, though, the marbled godwit.
It's a very beautiful bird. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what is also very interesting is hello, Christina. It's very interesting to look at all these different other species too. Like, what is the strategy of the fish colonies or the sheep colonies? And it's very interesting, some of the things which are very similar and some of them which are very different. And we know much less about it yet, but we will.
Mm.
Thank you.
Wonderful. One last question. Going.
God, yeah, no.
Okay, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Thank you so much, Pasha, Trudy, Keith, and Nina, for a beautiful presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I hope everybody else did too. Lovely to see Kate, one of the intercreators, with us as well. So, and I hope everybody has a lovely Friday night. We will gather again as a group, either informally at the water play session, no obligation, or the time for gathering will be on Monday afternoon, where all the teams will talk about their team projects on the map. So thank you, everybody. I hope you have a beautiful night, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Trudy, Keith, fabulous.
Thank you very much, everybody. It's fantastic.
Fantastic. Yeah. Oh, lovely to see you, Nina. So next time the show.
Go and have some sleep now, Nina.
I have to.